All right, this screencast is going to walk you through the steps to make a cookie cutter. I've already got some artwork saved off to my computer that I'm going to use for the outline of the cookie cutter. I'm going to do a cookie cutter kind of shaped like a cat. But depending on what kind of cookie cutter you're making, you may have like a school logo that you're tracing, or maybe something you've drawn by hand that you've scanned that you put in here that you want to trace, or just some picture that you find off the internet that you want to use. But kind of preparatory work for this, you want to have your image already saved somewhere and make sure you know where it's at so that we can use it. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm in a new part file here. So I went into File, New, and I selected the standard IPT, standard inch part, for my template. So it gives me a blank drawing here. The first thing I want to do is I want to bring that artwork that I had saved off in as a part of a sketch. All right, so I'm going to click on Create a 2D Sketch. And then I need to select one of these three planes. I'm just going to choose XY because that's what you're probably most used to working with in math class. This is just a plane I'm going to draw on. My sketch is going to be on this plane. Think of it like a piece of paper. There's my X and Y axes and my origin right there in the middle. But I don't want to draw anything here. I'm going to actually use the artwork that I've got saved. So I'm going to go up here to Image. And then there's my image. You need to make sure that you remember where you saved it to. I happen to save mine on my desktop, and that's where I went to, but you might have to find it. You might have to look through folders where you've got it saved to be able to bring it in. But mine's right there. So when I do that, you see it gives me a kind of a box where I can position where I want to place that artwork. All right. Just for simplicity's sake here, I'm going to kind of center it up visually, eyeball it, center it up on the origin here. And as soon as I click once, it'll let me position one of those images right there. I still got a box, so I could actually click and add multiple images if I needed that for something, but I don't. So I'm going to undo that twice. So there's my image. And at this point, I'm going to finish my sketch. And so I've got basically something that I can trace. I can trace around that and find out, get the shape, pull the shape out of this for my cookie cutter. All right, the next step is I'm going to create another 2D sketch, and I'm going to select the exact same plane again because I want to be looking into the same view so that I can see the cat shape, so I can use these drawing tools up here to trace around with lines and arcs and circles and whatever else I need. Now, this being a cookie cutter, I don't need all the details with the eyes and the nose and the mouth in here. I just need to basically trace around the outline of the ears and the head to make my cookie cutter. One thing I'm not really sure of at this point is what size is this artwork. I don't know what size it is. So just to kind of get an idea, I'm just going to draw a line from ear to ear. Okay, and if you didn't notice that, it was telling me that it was almost an inch long. I can also check it by putting a dimension on there, 0.986 inches wide. So that's telling me that the width of that cat head is less than an inch and a half. Now, for a cookie cutter, we probably want to go bigger than that. So at this point, what you probably want to do to save yourself a lot of work later on is to go back into that image file and scale it up. You could take it into Microsoft Paint, scale it up. In this case, I probably would want to go at least 2 times that scale. Would give me about a 2-inch wide cookie. I'd say probably more like a 4-inch. 4 times scale would give me like a 4-inch wide cookie. That's a pretty good sized cookie. So before you go in and do this, I would scale it so that when you check it with this method here, just measuring across an area to know what size you've got, it's pretty close to the size that you want your cookies to be. All right. Just for getting through this example here, though, I'm just going to leave it at the size that it is. I don't really care what size this line is. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. I just did that so I knew kind of what scale I'm working with here. All right. The alternative would be to go ahead and just model it right to this, knowing that I need to scale it up 4 times before I print it. So that's another way we could tackle it too. All right. So I'm in my sketch. I'm going to use a combination of lines and arcs and ellipses and rectangles, whatever I need to get this shape drawn. All right. So I'm going to show you a couple different commands. The ellipse command, if you pull this down, you can do a circle or an ellipse. The ellipse, looking at the shape of the head here, I see it is an ellipse. So I'm just going to go ahead and select that. The eyeball the center of my ellipse. Looks like it's approximately right about there. And then I'm going to set the width and the height of my ellipse. And you see I've got like a purple line, a pink line around there showing that I've got an ellipse drawn. All right. This is a separate sketch from the cat. I've got 2 sketches going on over here. The first sketch is just my artwork. The second sketch is actually going to be my contour for the cookie cutter. The next, I'm going to do the ears, and for that, if they were straight, I could use lines, but they're not. They're kind of arcs, kind of curves. So I'm going to use the arc command. A couple different ways we can do it, but I prefer to use the 3-point arc. The 3-point arc works like this. The first point that I pick is going to be one end of the arc. So I'm going to grab the tip of the ear. The second click is going to be the other end of the arc. So I'm going to bring it just inside of my ellipse here because I actually want to be able to trim that back. All right, so that's my second point. And then my third point, my third click is going to give me my curve. So something sort of like that. To do the next one, I'm going to make sure I snap to the end of that first arc. You see how I'm getting that green node up there? That tells me I'm snapping right to the end. So if I click there, it's going to be exactly on the end of that first arc. And same thing, I'm going to bring it in and just kind of get my shape in there, not worrying about where it's overlapping or gap because I'm going to trim that out and fix that later. All right. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue getting these ear shapes in here. And again, you use whatever commands you need to get it done. For this one, I'm going to make it a couple of arcs. So maybe from there to there, and then to get, because it's a little bit more curvy down here, make sure I snap to it and then zoom up a little bit here. Try to get that a little bit more precise. All right. So there I've got my shape. It's traced. I've got these extra pieces. I'm going to trim those out. When you use the trim command, the piece you click on is what goes away. It kind of shows it as a dashed line. That's the part that's going to be disappearing. So I'm going to get rid of the parts I don't need, leaving just the closed loop that I do need. Remember, I can't have any gaps in here. If I had little gaps in between the lines or anything, it would cause it not to work. So you want to make sure you got a good closed loop. That one looks pretty good, so I'm going to finish it. And now that I've got my outline traced, I can hide my original artwork. So over here in Sketch 1, I'm going to right mouse click and just say uncheck the visibility. That's going to basically hide it. So it's no longer visible. It's still there if I need it. I can always turn it back on, but right now it's hidden. So this is my profile of my cookie cutter. That's kind of like the first big step, getting that first shape in there. What I'm going to do here is just go ahead and extrude that. So I'm going to use the extrude command, and I'm going to give it some thickness. Let's say my overall cookie cutter thickness is going to be 1/2 inch, let's say. So I set it up with 1/2 inch and click OK. And now I have a solid version of that cat shape, that profile. So now what I want to do is I want to try to offset that shape. Hopefully it'll let me offset it inward, and I can use that inward offset to actually make a cut. Depending on the geometry, it may let me offset, the whole thing. It may let me offset just part of it. Heck, it may not let me offset any of it. You just got to kind of get in there and see what it'll let you do. So I'm going to create a new sketch on that flat. So I'm looking right into it. I'm going to project in the geometry. What that does is it basically takes the outline and brings it into my sketch so I can use it. So I can see it's outlined in yellow there. And then I'm just going to try this offset here. See if it'll let me offset that inward. Again, it won't let me bring it in, but it will let me bring it up. All right, so it won't let me bring it in, but it will let me bring it up. So let me try that. Okay, so let me offset the shape outward. I can still work with that. I can basically turn this outside shape into my extrusion, and then I'll go back and use that original shape for my cut. Just kind of do it backwards like that. So if I finish it and then extrude that new shape, making sure I get the whole thing. I don't want just the inside. I don't want just that stripe right there. I want the whole thing. So I make sure I get the whole thing selected, and I go ahead and extrude that 1/2 inch. Then I'm going to come back and use the one that I had originally planned for my cookie cutter to use for the cut. So I'm going to create a sketch on the face of it, project in the geometry so I get the whole outline of it like that. And then I'm going to use that shape to cut. I'm going to use it to cut in. So if I change it over here from join to cut, there it's cutting all the way through the 1/2 inch, which basically erases that part that I have. I want to go deeper than that because I actually want to cut into this bigger version, but not all the way through. If I went like a full inch, it would cut a hole all the way through it, but that's not what I want. So right there, it would basically cut a hole all the way through, just giving me a ribbon. But I actually want to leave a little bit of a flat on there, a little bit of a roof on there to be the top of my cookie cutter. So I'm only going to extrude that in 0.9 thick. Right? When I do that, it gives me basically my cat shape. My cookie cutter is 90% done at this point. I've got my my shape, and I've got my hole in the middle where the cookie's going to fit. All I need to do yet is get a handle in there, put a hole in there so the cookie doesn't get like vacuum locked up inside of there and hard to come out, and then sharpen the edge up. Okay, let's start with sharpening up the edge next. To sharpen the edge up, most times we can just use a command called chamfer, and a chamfer is basically where you're putting like a sharper edge on a normally 90-degree square corner. So let's try doing that. I can get the chamfer. It's up here next to fillet chamfer. And then if I pick an edge, let me start with this big one here. You pick an edge. Okay, and that's 0.125, which is probably way too big. So let me try changing that to a 0.03. There, that looks pretty good. 0.03 or maybe even a little bit bigger. 0.035. You can see it's leaving me that little bit of a flat right there. And then this red part is the part it's cutting away. So if I look at it from the side, you see it's putting that kind of an angled cut on there. And that looks pretty good. So I'm going to see if I can get the entire thing to go at once. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Just depends on the geometry. So if I add that into it, there we go. It's liking it so far. It's liking it so far. Yeah, we made it all the way around there. So it's putting that chamfer on there. That looks good, so I'm going to click on OK. So you look at it from, say, like the view looking in straight to the front here. It's put that angle on there. So I really only have a very small flat part that's doing the cutting. This angle out here is just helping it cut without smashing the dough, helping it cut it clean so it goes up inside. All right, let's put a vent hole in here. I create another sketch on the bottom portion of it, and I'm just going to do a rectangle, figuring that I'm going to have a handle on the back of it. I want to make sure I've got enough room for the ends of the handle to go on there. So paying attention to my dimensions there, it looks like my hole there is going to be about 0.7 wide. So I probably would be okay if my handle was maybe an inch in between. So I want to kind of remember these numbers here. And then I'm going to go like 0.2 wide. All right, so just roughly 0.2 by 0.7. I'm going to use that to cut. So I finish my sketch and then extrude it, select my shape, but I told I wanted to cut away. And that blows that rectangular hole all the way through the roof of that cookie cutter. And if I print it this way, I can get a really good, clean product because it won't have to build any structure to support it. It's going to build a raft below here, but then everything can be built without any supporting structure in there. So if I definitely want to print it with this being the top, but my handle is going to be on the back. So that's one of the reasons why we're kind of doing the handle separately. I'm going to have the handle over here on the side so I can print them at the same time. And as soon as the print's done, I can assemble them together and glue them. So I'm going to create a sketch. Let me see. If I click on Create Sketch and rotate it back, I don't have those planes anymore like I had in the beginning, but they're still there. If I click on the plus sign next to Origin and hover over these, there's the YZ plane. Looks like that would probably be a pretty good one to sketch on right there. All right, so I'm going to sketch on that YZ plane, and then off here to the side, this is the bottom, so I want to make sure that the bottom of my handle lines up with that. So I'm just going to draw a line off like this to make sure that I've got that bottom situated. Okay, my handle is going to be more or less an arc, so I'm going to do it as an ellipse. You could do it as a circle. You could do it as a rectangle if you wanted to, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it like that. And then I want to offset that to give me my thickness. There we go. And then I can trim it out because I really only need half of that profile. So I'm going to trim out the parts I don't need. There we go. So it would print that handle out right next to the cookie cutter. Okay, so I'm done with that. I'm going to finish it and extrude it. This only needs to be, it does need to be real wide. Let's try like a 0.3 width. That looks pretty good. You can play around with that a little bit if you need to. But once you've extruded it, that's going to print out separate from the cookie cutter. I could print that out and that would glue, that rectangle right there would glue on this side, and this rectangle right here would glue down here on this side. To make it have a little bit better hand feel, so it's not so kind of clunky and sharp, I'm going to add some radiuses, some fillets up here on the handle. So I'm going to use fillet, which is kind of like a chamfer, but it's round instead of on an angle. And I'm going to select the edges that I want to round off. I'm definitely going to have to adjust my dimension there because that's way too big. Let me try a 0.06. Nope, doesn't like that. 0.03. That 0.03 looks like it's going to break those edges off pretty good. Let's see if I can maybe go up to a 0.04. Yeah, that looks good. So there I've rounded that out, so it's just not as sharp in your hand as you're using it. I think we're good. So we've got our cat-shaped cookie cutter. We've got a vent hole in there so the cookie doesn't get like vacuum sealed up in there. It'll help it come out easier. We've got our point coming down to an edge. It's going to give us a nice clean cut on the cookie. And then off the side at the same depth, basically this is the bottom of this is the bottom of this. So the same bottom will be sitting on the plate right next to each other. We print it out. We crack them off. We take that handle and we glue it on the back side. We should have a cookie cutter that shouldn't require a whole lot of cleanup at all. All right, so those are the steps for the cookie cutter. At this point, you would definitely want to save your file, and then you could attach your file to an email if you're using Autodesk Inventor and send it to me, or just call me over. I'll bring a flash drive, and I'll have you export it for me and save it on my flash drive. But that's how you would do a cookie cutter using Autodesk Inventor.